Today, you can look forward to a great episode. We're going to focus on restoration growth and explore lessons learned from decades of entrepreneurship, leadership, company culture, acquisitions, and long-term business growth. Really, from the challenges of scaling an organization to the realities of succession planning, our guest today, who has also served as an RA president, offers practical insights for restoration professionals and business owners like yourself at every single stage of your journey. It's my pleasure to welcome Mark Springer with Dayspring Restoration to the program. Mark, it's good to see you.
Oh, always good to see you, Jeff. And before we dive into the content here, just want to thank you for one, having me on, and then also for being such a long and steady supporter of the restoration industry. I know that I was paying attention to what you were putting out in the industry many years ago, and you've been consistent and such a great voice for the industry. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, Mark. Kind words. But this isn't about me. This is about you and the work you do.
Hmm.
So introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and walk us through how Dayspring Restoration got its start and where you're at today.
That sounds great. Well, I've been so blessed to be a part of the restoration industry since I was just a young guy. My father started Dayspring Restoration back in 1989. So in 1989, I was 11. I joke around that I was indentured servitude there. That'd be the more politically correct way to say it. I didn't have a choice as to whether or not I was going to be in the property restoration industry. And I've told many people this over the years that I think when I was probably in my high school years, if you would have asked me, what do you want to do when you have your own career? I would have said anything but property restoration. It was, a dirty job. And, you think back to the late 80s and early 90s, what we did in the industry. I mean, it's appalling. I mean, I remember working on projects with, minimal PPE, maybe some, ankle rubber boots and, pair of rubber gloves or something like that. The mold remediation projects. I mean, we saw the whole shift in mold remediation in the early 2000s. But prior to that, I mean, the things that we did were so different. The whole industry was different. And so I was able to grow up in the industry, had an incredible opportunity then as I got older, as I got through those high school years where I sort of got asked the like, this is a really nasty job, to seeing the broader opportunity. And my dad gave me, I mean, he was very wise about how he did it. There was no shortcuts for him. I mean, I came up through the industry and in the most difficult positions that were difficult and hard and smelly and dirty, and then ultimately to positions of responsibility and then estimating, project management, and then ultimately took the company over in 1998. And at that, we were just in Missoula, Montana. Not only was I incredibly blessed to grow up in the restoration industry, but also blessed to be able to grow up in Montana before Yellowstone, the TV show, came out. So very different state back there when before everyone thought they would see Kevin Costner on every street corner. But a great place to grow up, great markets to work in. The Montana market was a great place to build a business because we were able to do things a little different than a lot of other companies were, because things like mass media advertising in a rural market are very affordable. We were able to promote our company far and wide. I mean, if there was a place that I could promote Dayspring Restoration, television, radio, sports venues, you name it, I was there. And a lot of companies can't do that. If you're working in, the Bay Area or Boston or Miami, Florida, you can't afford to be advertising on television. But we were able to make a huge impact on that, grow the business, and then in 2020 sold our company to a private equity firm down in Texas that was the platform company. Dayspring became the platform company for Fleet Response, and Fleet Response grew. Things kind of got off track there after a few years, and then just last year I was able to step back into the company. So it's good to be back in the industry now. and took over as the CEO of Fleet Response, which is a national platform now with companies across the country. We have about 400 employees at Fleet Response in about 20 locations. So, very blessed to be back engaged in the industry again and be at the place that I love.
You're telling me that if I come to see you, I'm not going to see Kevin Costner on
Yeah,
screen.
actually, I
That's
think it's people.
disturbing.
What's the other guy? I haven't actually. I've seen a few episodes of Yellowstone, but the guy I think is Rip, the guy that's like the bearded guy. That's
He's
the one
really
everyone
tough.
wants to see, because he's got like his own bourbon now, and I mean they've spun this thing into a million different things. But yeah, no, it's funny because I will run in. I'll have as I travel around the country for Fleet. Um, I'll run into people on the airport and, on airplanes and stuff that are like, they hear that I'm from Montana and they're like, they just want to talk about Yellowstone. And,
Too funny.
do you really, do people really say take him to the train station? And I'm like, no, 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 there's none of that. So
Yeah, that's funny. And Rip is a tough guy. I can see him being
he's,
important in that show. Yeah.
yeah, that's right.
Well, Omar, thank you for the details there and a great family operation. Now, you talked about Fleet there a bit because that's a newer venture. How's that going? And what should people know about that organization? How does it tie in with Dayspring
Yeah.
Restoration?
Yeah, so like I said, Dayspring, there's a number of companies across the country that are a part of Fleet. Some ones that are very well known in the restoration industry leading, and then local market leading companies like Dalworth Restoration down in the DFW market. I mean, Dalworth's incredible because they're a household name in a market that is an NFL market, which is crazy. The company's been led for several generations by the Hobbs family, just great guys in the industry. A lot of people know Shane, and then now his sons, Josh and Nick, who run that region of the country for us. Companies like Cousineau Restoration out there, Northwest Ohio, Restore Pro and FRS down in the southeast, and then Alpha Omega Restoration up here in Montana. So, Fleet is really one of the only operator-led companies now. So, the private equity company was involved for a number of years. There was a number of challenges. I mean, some of them are just challenges in the restoration market. I mean, there's been a slowdown over the last few years. There haven't been national storms and those events that generate a lot of revenue. I think there was some challenges around timing as it related, especially to interest rates. I mean, a lot of these private equity companies are using leverage for buying these companies, and really around the time that Fleet was a rocket ship, there was a lot of debt being put on the business, and then the cost of carrying that debt just was exponential, and that really had some challenges for the business. And so the private equity company now has stepped out. There was a process over the last 6 months that myself and some of the former owners were able to work with the lender, which is a great company called Monroe Capital out of the Midwest. They're based in Chicago. And we worked with them to restructure the business. So we're sort of back. The original founders and owners are back involved, have equity in it. And then we were able to broaden that to about 20 other leaders in the organization who are now equity holders in the business. So we are a true operator-driven, operator-led organization. And our entire leadership team is built with operators who have multi-generational experience or multi-decade experience, I should say, rather. And it's really exciting because there are a lot of things that led to these companies being successful over many decades of time, going back to the 80s, early 80s, even late 70s. And a lot of that was lost in that process of rolling things up. And now getting the company back to its roots, getting back to the things that really made those companies great has already proven to be enormously successful. It's incredible to see as this team's come together, how quick the turnaround for this has been, and we're just excited to be back in a place where we're doing what we set out to do, which I think we'll dive a little deeper on here in the course of this discussion to get
Yeah.
back to the basics.
So before we move on, so Fleet is not a franchisor, it's a network of,
That's right.
okay.
Yeah, and so we are, owned. There's really two entities that comprise the ownership of fleet. There's the group of us operators, and then the lender who had lent the money. Now that debt converted to equity, and so we now are co-owners with the lender who has, like I said, they've been just tremendously helpful as we go through this. I mean, it's a difficult situation. I mean, these are not the situations that anyone anticipates when you set out to do a national roll-up with private equity backing. There's a lot of them, and I think there's going to be a lot more of them. I think that owners who are contemplating sale of their companies are going to need to be very, very careful because there's a lot of things that can be promised in some cases to entrepreneurs and operators that can be difficult to fulfill. And certainly that was our experience. And not all those things always are things that you can assign blame to onto an individual or an entity. Some of them are market driven, they're macro driven. But certainly entrepreneurs need to be very cautious. And if they go into these situations, they need to make sure that they have their eyes wide open to the downside or potentially what could happen, which isn't what you're going to talk about when someone's trying to get you to sell your company to them. But they're the reality that can happen. And certainly I think as there's been credit challenges in a lot of different industries. This story can be a common one, and one that people just need to be aware of.
So more and more, what I'm seeing are exactly what you just talked about. Companies, business owners building their company, they're all talking about selling eventually. It's just
Right.
the reality more so than way back in the day. So, but let's talk about tough challenges in business. So you mentioned a few, but looking back at Dayspring, besides your dad dragging you into the business, kicking and screaming, what were a couple of speed bumps or challenges along the way that you look back and you go, that was tough, but we got through it? Any
Mm.
come to mind?
Yeah, man, we take a whole series of interviews. I could probably tell your viewers, here's the top 50 things not to do in business and how to avoid them, because I did all of them. But this is really what is such an important thing for all entrepreneurs. You are going to make mistakes. You are going to have many factors that conspire against your success. And it's the resilience of the entrepreneur who's able to develop themselves and their organization through those challenges to come out the other side and have success. You hear this common thread and theme with any successful entrepreneurs. I mean, you think of Steve Jobs, right? I mean, he got fired at Apple by his board and had to leave the organization for a number of years before he came back in, and then ultimately led Apple to great success there. So, these pitfalls, challenges, difficulties, if we look at them the right way and we have a bias toward learning, they can actually be a blessing in disguise. But I think a couple things that are really important that I would just say, if looking back, they were the ones that were the most critical. The first one I would say is around leadership. And, I took over my dad's organization at a really young age. And the reality is that I had incredible mentors and I had incredible people around me that helped me avoid some big challenges, particularly financial challenges. There's a lot of companies that just don't make it because of debt, and they can get too far extended, on a line of credit, and they see all the fancy new equipment of the folks that advertise in Cleanfax magazine, and they get really excited about acquiring new equipment before the business is ready sometimes for those investments. And so, really the first and most important thing that I had to come to grips with is that if our company was going to be successful, I had to invest in myself as a leader. And that doesn't sound really always that exciting, right? Because what I found is that whenever we had challenges, when there were things that went back, when they just didn't go according to our plan in the business, if I was honest with myself, usually it was because I made a mistake. If I was willing to be honest and I didn't just have those blinders sometimes that we have as entrepreneurs, the problem was with me. And it was usually a mistake that I made. And I realized that if our company was going to be able to grow, it was going to directly correlate to my ability to grow as a leader. And so I started really in my mid 20s, I started on this journey of really trying to understand what is exemplary leadership, what are the core tenets of that, and how do I help the people within our organization, not just me, myself, but also the people in our organization grow as leaders. Because the reality is that a lot of people have examples of leadership, but they're bad examples. And they have situations where they've seen these things where people didn't follow through. They weren't honest. They didn't have vision for the business. Kind of all these areas where you have exemplary leadership contrasted with poor leadership. Most people, especially the young people who are working in my organization, didn't have anyone who had shown them, here how you conduct a meeting. Here's how you set goals. Here's how you follow through on those things to make sure that the team is able to have the support and the resources that they need to be able to grow and see the business achieve what it's possible. So really the first big thing is a focus on leadership. Really, really important because, John Maxwell said, and it's almost a cliche, everything rises and falls on leadership. As much of a cliche as that is, it's 100% true. If you take that piece out and if I look at an organization where things are difficult, usually it's going to go back to, an owner, a leader who's just checked out, right? Or they say, do as I say, not as I do. And those sort of things always cause chaos and difficulty in the business. So that'll be number one. Number two is, as restoration owners, we work in a business that is so difficult to predict, especially as it relates to cash, finances, and I would say financial forecasting. So earlier in my career, I had a great mentor in the Rosebrook family. I know you know Phil Sr., who's passed here recently, and we miss him a ton. Phil Jr. and Dave Rosebrook. I brought them in my mid 20s. I think this is a long time ago now, but brought them in. I just said, I need to learn how to manage our company by the numbers. And, having discipline around revenue recognition, WIP processes, budgeting, being able to understand how does the overhead for this business work, and not just leaving those things to chance, and then being able to have the financial resources to draw on when large losses and opportunities came around. That was huge. So those would be the two big things: leadership and being able to really run the business by the numbers. Those were the two biggies.
Looking back, maybe back to your father and what he taught you, what were the foundational principles that helped build Dayspring into what it is now? Things that you've picked up and you now carry with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing's always around integrity. And this is such an important thing. I think restorers are in such a unique place as a business, as an industry, because there's so much trust. There's not very many businesses where you just go in to your customer's home, in a case where there's a lot of exigency around an emergency, and you have someone sign an authorization, just say, do what you need to do, and then send my insurance company a bill at the end. And if that relationship is not honored from a position of integrity, it can be very problematic for restorers. And so, my dad really focused on with me, the key of integrity is, what do we do when no one else is watching? And as restorers, there's a lot of places where I think that was really important, because we're in folks' homes when they're not there. We're working for clients that sometimes don't make the decision on the scope of work that we initiate. We have to initiate that scope of work in good faith, and know that we're not doing less than we should be doing, because we're trying to protect an insurance relationship, and we don't want to make them upset about how much the project costs, and ultimately the customer pays the price for that. Or we're doing more for the customer than we should be, and going beyond what would be reasonable and taking advantage of that side. So there's kind of a real delicate balance in this industry that we have to weigh. And my dad was, just an exemplary person who led by example in making sure that we had integrity in that. And then also just having integrity with our team and making sure that, if we make a promise to our people, we keep those promises. And that it's something that I hear and see in the time I've been in the industry now and been able to be involved in a lot of different places and capacities in the restoration industry. So many times it's sad because the most important asset in the organization and the team and the people sometimes just feel like I can't trust the owners or I can't trust the leadership. And so keeping your promises with the team is of paramount importance. And I would say that that would be the other thing that I think he instilled in me from a very young age.
Let's dig into that a bit more. Where was Dayspring in its prime?
Yeah, so when we sold the company, we had 7 locations in Montana. Revenues were somewhere in the mid 20s, 20, 25 million, somewhere in that range. I think we had a little bit of a downtick in 2020 with COVID. There was the period of time when everything was shut down. So I think when we sold the company, it was 22 million dollars there. We had 7 locations with about 150 people. One of the things that I was so proud of for our organization is we had so many people that were with us so long. I mean, we had people that were 20 plus, a lot of 20 plus tenured employees, 20 plus years as far as tenure. And we were profitable. We had a very predictable business that, every single year, pretty much like clockwork, we were able to meet our goals and targets. And we had grown, year after year after year after year. And those were things it's fun to lead a company that is able to do those sort of things. We won a lot of awards over the years that we were in business, but the ones that I was always the most proud of is we won many times in many markets that we were in, employer of the year, and that's just your people voting on that with the local newspaper or whatever. And in some cases, we had the opportunity to win those, and we were rewarded with those accolades against other employers that were much larger than us. I mean, we were 150 people. We would be competing against colleges and hospitals and large companies that had 1,000 employees or so. And so those were very rewarding and things that we really appreciated.
So, with that in mind, as you went from a smaller company to a bigger one, large, that you eventually sold, and now you're back, how do you preserve that culture when there's so
Mm.
many people? What did you do to do that?
Well, again, I think I mean, first and foremost, it goes down to having a process and having a methodology that the company anchors to around a couple key tenets. I mean, first, I already mentioned was leadership. You have to have a way to develop leaders within the organization who believe in the future and the vision of the company. And really what we would draw people around was a couple important things. One was our core values. Dayspring had it's sort of an acronym called CARE that our core values were built around. And those core values could be recited by anyone in the organization around the entire state of Montana. If you bumped into an employee in the grocery store, I guarantee if you said, "Hey, what's this organization's core values?" I guarantee you they could tell you what those core values were and then how that actually played out in the organization. And it was a really big deal because we hired people according to the core values. We promoted people according to the core values. And if there were someone that we had to remove from the organization, it was because of a violation of the core values. And so we really lived that. And that is key, right? Is being able to keep that consistency across the organization. The other thing is really rigor to a plan and to the vision and future of the company. It was interesting. Jeff, when I was out of the company, I went and got this certification. It's called a CEPA, Certified Exit Planning Advisor. So I helped other businesses, primarily out of the restoration industry, because I had a non-compete for a couple years there. But I would help folks with the preparation for and ultimately the sale of their company. Because you said it earlier, everyone's exiting at some point. It's If you are not thinking about that and you're not planning for it, you're going to get a really, really difficult surprise. And I always say this, an exit ready business is a valuable business. Even if you don't sell your business, if it's ready to sell, that is a valuable entity and one that you will enjoy running. But I was speaking at a conference a couple falls ago. It was like October 2 years ago, and I asked in the room, how many of you, there's about 200 entrepreneurs in the room, how many entrepreneurs in that room, by show of hands, have a strategic plan? And it was like six hands, and the whole room went up. And then I asked a follow-up question. I said, first of all, I was surprised it was that few, but it was not very many. Second question is, how many of you were in October? How many of you have reviewed that plan in the last 90 days? One hand stayed up. So if you can have a plan for your business, a strategic plan that looks out more than just 12 months, but looks out 3 to 5 years into the future, if you can clearly understand what are the things that we have to do in this organization to reach our goals, what are our goals, and then you can stick to that and you can execute according to that, you're ahead of over 99% of the competition. So that was really, really important. And one of the things that I think was most helpful for us as we grew and scaled around Montana.
I want to say I was at that conference, but maybe I wasn't. But I remember something like that. Maybe you did that more than one
I've
place.
mentioned that as a few, you might have been at the other, or the one I spoke down at
Yeah, I think I recall that. That was a
Mid-South.
eye opener because I remember,
Yeah.
yeah, not a lot of hands went up, and it's like, what's your plan? So, yeah.
Yeah, most don't. And, again, having a plan is important. And there are a lot of times I've helped a number of different businesses with their strategic planning. It's almost worse if you have a strategic plan, but you don't revisit it and operate the business according to the plan. Because a lot of times your key leadership team will become disenfranchised and they'll sort of check out, right? And they'll start to get cynical when you get to the annual planning process because they're like, we're going to get together, we're going to have a bunch of rah-rah, and then we're not going to do any of this stuff. And the most important job of the leader is to make sure, I think there's two things that for leaders of the organization that you have to do. Number one, you have to set the example on the culture. You have to really be the chief culture officer in the organization. And the second is you have to maintain consistency according to the plan and make sure that we don't just set, there's kind of two sides of the business. One is strategic thinking and then execution planning. You have to have the execution planning as importantly as the strategic plan.
So, just a couple more questions, and we'll wrap it up. But I do want to talk about because I know you, Mark. We've had meals together and talked a lot. You've spoken about faith, purpose, and stewardship. That's core to
Mhm.
you.
Yeah.
How have those beliefs, not setting aside the pure business side of Mark, because you have to have the business side, but how have those beliefs influenced your leadership style and the decisions that you've made, both good and bad, successful and difficult seasons in business?
Mm. Yeah. Well, so this will be a little personal. I don't know. I think a lot of people know I've talked about this stuff, but maybe I'll talk a little deeper about it than I normally do, as long as you're okay. You say pause, Mark, if I go too far. Um, but I think a lot of these things get down to just our presuppositional assumptions that we have as humans, right? And mine is that, I believe that there is a God and that we're accountable to him. And so ultimately, in the book of Proverbs, it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so for me, that's what anchors integrity, right? It's not that what we do when no one else is watching. I said that's kind of earlier, but I go one step further, and it is I actually know someone's always watching, right? I always believe that God is watching and God knows the decisions that we make when no one else is there. So, ultimately my goal, and it's not perfect because anyone you probably know me well enough to be like, I know Mark Springer is no perfect human being. We do the best we can to honor God every day, but we still know we're broken humans who fail, and we got to be open, honest, and transparent about that when that happens. But my goal is just honor God every day in the decisions that we make. And there's going to be times that we face difficult challenges where it's almost those no-win type of situations, and I will find in some of those, I'm like, I might have to spend some time praying to say, I have no easy decision here, and I need guidance. I need to know how I'm going to handle this situation. And what I found is that being able to trust that God's sovereignty and control over these situations is much bigger than little Dayspring Restoration in Montana, and Fleet, which is still in the scope of time and eternity, even though a much larger company than what Dayspring was. It's still just stuff. And Jesus said, my kingdom's not of this world. So I can remember that the things that we're doing now are stewardship. They are not the most important things. The most important things are being accountable for what we do and the way we treat people and live this stuff out in integrity and, in a way that is not hypocritical. Because sometimes the challenge that folks can have is they interact with Christians. They say if they lived their life according to the stuff they say, it would be good. But we're just going to strive for that, to be consistent and have integrity in what we do.
That was well said, and you didn't go too long, so all good there. Yeah.
I'll try not to get on that soapbox for too
No,
long.
it's a good soapbox to be on. There's always a bigger picture, a
Mhm.
greater good, things we can do beyond the business side of things, which, that's why we're here to talk about business, but
Yeah.
yeah, personal as well.
Yeah.
Last question. I think we covered what we wanted to talk about today, but I would like to know if you're going to have a cup of coffee with a young entrepreneur and they're like,
Mhm.
Mark, what can I do to build my company? You shared a
Mhm.
lot of stuff, but anything specific you tell this young entrepreneur, this is what you need to do to make it work.
Mhm. Yeah, so we covered a lot of them, but I would say two things that are really, really important beyond what we talked about. Um, the first one is consistency. In the period of time that I spent just working with and coaching entrepreneurs, I would always start the meeting with a plea and a call to consistency. The people who work in your organization need to know that you are stable and that you can be counted on to run that organization in a way that protects their families and their future. And so as entrepreneurs and as leaders, we got to show up every day. It doesn't matter if we had a bad day, if there was a issue with the kids or we found out that the transmission's going out in the car, whatever it is, we can't show up, on Tuesday morning with our knickers in a knot and not treat people well, right? So you have got to be consistent and everyone's watching what you're doing. And along those lines with consistency daily, there's consistency over time. And there are so many cases where I have seen people quit in their businesses or stop what they're doing right as they're about to the point that they're really close to a breakthrough. And so if you can be consistent over time, and it's just like exercise, if you go into the gym 2 times a year, you're going to hate it. If you make those investments day in, day out over time, I promise you your business will have success. You will get where you want to get to, but it takes that consistency. And so those would be the two things I think that I would talk to a young entrepreneur about: daily consistency and then consistency over time.